Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Motivational Intelligence Podcast. I'm Sean Johnson, and it's our job on this podcast to deconstruct for you what makes people and organizations successful. This episode is part 2 in our series on how to get rich with Jerry the Mailman. So if you didn't listen to part 1, I recommend hit pause, go back and listen to part 1 first, because this episode is going to build on it. So part 1 is about getting control over your money. In this episode, Dave and I are talking about what Jerry, the Millionaire Mailman, taught him about building your net worth. So how to structure investments, what to invest in, so that the amount of time it takes you to double your money is limited. When you're ready to buy a home, all those kinds of good things. Before we get into that, during sound check for this episode, I actually saved Dave singing AC/DC rock and roll song, and he has no idea that I saved it. So I want to give that to you for your listening pleasure. Enjoy his vocals, and we'll see how long it takes him to find out about this and get pissed at me. But if you know Dave, send this everywhere you can so we can embarrass him a little bit. All right, enjoy this episode. Until next time.
The Motivational Intelligence Podcast is produced by the team at Too Logical. Too Logical is an international corporate training firm and the world's leading expert in motivational intelligence, which is the ability to understand, manage, and change the motives people have. Too Logical offers over 30 different keynotes, workshops, and full training courses to small, medium, and large Fortune 500 companies in 53 countries, a lot of which you're probably familiar with. Pfizer, Bank of America, GE, Constellation Brands, P&G, and more. All solutions are completely customized, and the feedback from these sessions will blow your mind. If you have any training or speaking needs or just want to say hey, head over to toological.com.
All right, we're back for part 2. Money Secrets of the Millionaire Mailman.
There you go.
Our man, Jerry.
Yes, paying tribute.
So last time we talked about your experience with Jerry.
Yeah.
So can you give a quick recap on who Jerry was, just in case somebody's listening to this that hasn't listened to the episode, which if you haven't listened to the last episode before listening to this one, I highly recommend hit pause, go back and listen to part 1 because it's going to build on this.
Yeah.
But, for people that listened,
Yep.
just a quick refresher.
Sure. So, when I was starting out in my life, I found myself in a position where I basically was making no money and living off of credit cards for a period of time. Racked up about a little over $38,000 in credit card debt. Was basically using one credit card to pay off a minimum payment on another credit card. So needless to say, there was more than a little financial pressure, which, financial pressure too is, it ripples in every aspect of your life. It's what couples fight about. It, keeps you awake at night. So, I mean, there's a lot of stressors that come with that as well.
Makes you fight about cans of clams.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. So we all got to find our why in life, So as I was struggling with all of this, there was a gentleman that I had met when I was in college who was a retired mailman and come to find out a multimillionaire, despite the fact that he never made more than $50,000 any year of his life. And so Jerry, in his wisdom and kindness, decided to take me under his wing and teach me what he'd learned about really controlling your money and building your net worth. So in the first part, we talked about the 3 components of really controlling your money, which is putting in place a budget, making it a mission to minimize or outright eliminate your personal debt, and putting in place a save and buy mentality, so that you're not falling victim to, really what a lot of people fall victim to in the financial world. And I remember, Jerry saying to me back then, he said, as I was kind of grappling with what he was teaching me, he said, Dave, he goes, if you don't control your money, he goes, other people will. And he said, so you just simply got to make a decision. Do you want to make them rich or do you want to make yourself rich? Because that's really what you're doing.
That's your choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, Yeah, and particularly what he had said about being much more aware of the interest that you're paying, and how much that adds up over time was huge. And after the last time we talked, actually, I went home, and this was good because I hadn't done a lot of this stuff, and I went home and actually kind of said, all right, Sean, like I'm going to treat myself as a business. So I, using a lot of the stuff we were talking about, I was like, all right, I'm going to put together what's my balance sheet look like? What are my operating expenses, which I kind of use as like the fixed costs. What are my costs of goods sold? Like what are the things that I want to buy in the future? What are my revenue streams coming in? So I have the income statement, I have the cash flow statement, and it was actually like incredibly helpful. It was because so much of it for me was just jostled around in my head,
exactly,
and you can't really get a good feel for what does my financial picture actually look like,
right?
And so doing that, and you could probably find just templates of these like basic business financial documents online, which is what I did, just to make it simple on yourself, so you're not starting from scratch. But it was super helpful for me to kind of just get a picture of like, all right, here's where I am, which I feel like gives you it gave me at least a much greater sense of control, because before it was just kind of like flying by the seat of my pants of
we live more and more, in a cashless society where, and it's gotten to the point where, whether we're waving our phone or, whether we're pulling out a credit card or, whatever it is, it makes it so easy not to think about the fact that every time you do that, it's money coming out of your pocket or coming out of your bank account. And it's a genius strategy for the financial institutions because the more they take that sense of loss, from us, the easier and less painless they make it, the easier it makes it to spend money.
Yeah, and the more money we're naturally going to spend.
Exactly. And then the more debt you run up, so the more interest they make, so it just becomes this, perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
And for, if you look at a financial institution, the interest we pay on credit card, it is their highest margin product.
Yeah, and I definitely fall into that category of I rarely ever use cash. I never carry cash anymore because I don't really have to. Most places, 99% of the places I go, they take credit card, and if I would need. In the past, now there's Venmo, so you're splitting a tab with people. It's not like you need cash anymore. You're just like, all right, I'll send you $20 for to split the bar tab or whatever it is. But I think you're right. That makes it so much simpler, but which it makes it easier to spend money.
Right, you're more detached from that concept of that.
Right.
It's, if you got to pull $20 out of your wallet, it's a whole lot different.
Yeah, handing that over is much more painful than just swiping a credit card.
Exactly, or sending it via Venmo.
Yeah. Right. So that's what I did after our last conversation. So thank you for that.
There you go. Well, thank Jerry.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry, wherever you are.
There you go.
So that was super helpful. So I would recommend doing that, or some version of that. And that's kind of what Jerry had been talking about for you. In putting together the budget, I kind of just went, let's put together everything. Which was super helpful, and kind of what that started to put some, shed some light on is where I am now, in terms of these things like what am I spending, on the budget, what's my debt look like, what are the things that I want to buy in the future. But it also kind of, I think is a good setup to our conversation today about kind of part two of building your net worth is, okay, here's what my picture looks like right now. How do I grow this? How do I add things to, this balance sheet to get my money working for me? So that was kind of the second place that Jerry took you. So what did he teach you kind of in this phase? Once you got control over your money, how do you then start to build your net worth?
So, and for everybody listening, at least for me, getting control over my money didn't happen overnight. It took it took a couple months to really start to feel like I had a handle on things and a good sense of where money was going and some kind of a decision-making process about, I want to spend this much in this area of life. And, so it took a little bit of time to get there. And so Jerry, it was really cool. We would get together about once a month, and he'd ask me how I was doing, and what I was struggling with, and he'd get my head set straight, but a couple months in, when I had some measure of control over things, that's when he took me to this second conversation, which is, very much about, now that you're controlling your money, now you got to work on building your net worth. And so there were 4 elements of that he taught me, and again, it was a little bit over time, but
yeah.
The first one was a philosophy that he had told me, and it was called "Pay yourself first." So that was the very first thing he focused on. The second thing he really focused me on was learning about how to invest your money and what to invest in to grow your money. The third thing is, we sat and we talked about the big purchase, and for most people, the biggest purchase they make in their life is a home, and really understanding when you should buy a home, why you should buy a home, those types of things. And then the fourth and final thing, part of that, was really now taking the time to, in essence, protect what it is that you've worked so hard to build.
Yeah. Okay, so that gives us a good outline. Let's get into the nitty gritty. So you said the first thing he mentioned to you was this philosophy of pay yourself first.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? You putting money in your back pocket? What do you mean pay yourself first?
So what he did is he gave me a book. The book was called The Richest Man in Babylon.
I like the title.
Yeah, I don't. It's been so long, I don't remember who the author was, but it was a short little kind of parable book that talked about these brothers and the way that they were using money and stuff like that. And the basic premise of the book was all about tithing, right? Traditionally, at least for me, when I thought about tithing, I connected it to religion. I think in the Mormon religion, they tithe 10% of everything that they make to the church.
Yep.
So the premise behind the book was that you should pay yourself first before you pay anybody else. And so what Jerry recommended was a minimum of 10% of every dollar that comes basically into the house. You take 10% off the top of it, and that you funnel into some type of an investment vehicle.
Okay. So is that so you're taking this 10% off? Is this before? How about your personal debt? Mm-hmm. So at this point. You said it took a couple years to work down that debt. Should you be doing this? Should you be getting rid of all your debt first and then doing this, or are you doing both at the same time? Does this apply when you have a lot of debt?
Yeah, and that's actually exactly the question that I asked Jerry, because I'm like, well, Jerry, I got $38,000 in credit card debt, and you're telling me I should take 10% and of every dollar and I said, wouldn't I be better off taking that 10% and putting it to paying down the debt? And so what Jerry said to me was, he said, look, Dave, he goes, right now, he goes, you're wasting that 10% on something, he said, and it's just money that's flying out the window on little purchases and things like that. So he said what'll happen is, he goes, set it up like in your bank so that you do an automatic transfer out of your checking account into like a savings account or something. If you get paid on the 15th and the 30th, there's 10% comes out on the check that comes in on the 15th, and 10% comes out on the check that comes in on the 30th. And he said what'll happen is that he goes, you won't have, he goes, the first couple of times, he goes, you'll notice that the money's not there. He said, but what'll happen in pretty short order is, he said, you won't even notice that money isn't there. And so I said, okay. I said, well, that makes sense. I said, but I said, I'm just, starting out here in my career. I said, I'm not making a lot of money. I said, so, we're not really talking about, all that much money. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, what'll happen is, he goes, over time, he said that 10% will grow into a substantial sum of money. And he said, so don't worry if it's, if it's, $100 is coming out on the 15th and, on the 30th or whatever it is. He said, it's more about the power that you gain over time. And he said the other thing, and this was really cool, and it was something that I didn't, I don't know if I put, I don't know if I really understood when he first talked to me about it. But he said, over time, what'll happen is, he goes, that money will accumulate. He goes, you'll be investing it, so it's going to be growing on top of, what you've actually put in there. And he said, and as it grows, he goes, having that money there will give you tremendous peace of mind. He said, because because it's there, it's your safety net, it's your security, and he was 100% right, and those times in life where, everybody's life, you have the ebbs and the flows and those kinds of things, but knowing that you've got this chunk of money that's there, it not only has it grown over time to become more substantial, but it definitely does give you a sense of kind of calmness.
Yeah. That you're not going to slip back into.
Exactly.
Into that you have something that's growing.
Exactly.
When it seems like, for this first part of paying yourself, there's the tactical side of it, which is start to get your money to work for you. But it also seems like the reason for doing this first is even more mental than just the mathematics of it. Where, you kind of talked about developing the habit, essentially,
right.
and developing, in putting together your budget. I think, you'll probably curb down some of that spending, but also, just pulling it out is developing the habit of investing this and going forward. So even if you're not making a lot of money now, you'll be in the habit when it's going to be a substantial amount of money.
Right. And what he said too was, because I asked him, I said, well, what about, later on when I was, putting money into a 401k and those kinds of things, I asked him, I said, Jerry, does this count as my, my 10% account? He goes, no. He goes, maximize what you're putting away in your retirement and those kinds of things, but still keep that 10% account.
Interesting. Okay, so it's not your 401k.
No.
So, okay, that was going to be my next question is where are you putting this? So,
right.
So this should be on top of what you're putting into
Exactly.
your 401k off the top of your paycheck.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, he's recommending for the 401k, max out what your contribution can be.
Yeah, and particularly if, obviously there's a significant tax advantage to putting money, into a 401k or an IRA or those kinds of things. And plus a lot of companies, they have matching programs.
Yeah.
And, so, in talking to people over the years, I mean, a lot of people, they're not even aware of the fact that is available to them. So, some companies it's dollar for dollar up to a certain point. Some companies it's some percentage thereof. But that's free money. That's, above and beyond your salary that people can be taken advantage of. And it's, it's something where it's tax deferred. So it makes anybody who's not maximizing what they're, putting into their retirement accounts is missing out on a significant financial opportunity.
Yeah. All right. So you're maxing out what you're going to put into your retirement accounts,
right.
your 401k. That's different than paying yourself.
Paying yourself first.
That 10%. Okay. So after you're putting the money into the 401k, you're maxing that out, whether, depending on what your company setup is. The next thing you're doing is you're paying yourself that. You're trimming 10% off of what you're making. where are you putting that money?
Okay. So this is where Jerry started to teach me about investments. So we sat and we talked, and candidly, that was very overwhelming to me. So it really
It can be very intimidating.
It decidedly was to me, and I didn't really understand all the different options, the advantages, and typically, I think, at least for me, if something seems overwhelming and intimidated, you tend to shy away from it.
Yeah. Sure. Well, and you had a finance background.
Exactly.
Too. Yeah. So, I think and I have a finance background too. And it's intimidating even when you do have a finance background, which I can't imagine, it's going to be probably even more intimidating when you don't.
Right. And I mean, there are people who, their whole life is tied up in, studying different stocks and what companies are doing this and what companies are doing that and who's got this breakthrough new drug that's coming out and all of those kinds of things. So, as a layperson who doesn't have access to that information, nor really the time to get immersed in it, it decidedly seemed like something where there was a much higher likelihood of me screwing it up than doing it the right way.
Right. Yeah. And so how do you kind of tame that beast? Because you're entering. So it's all right. I've taken it aside this 10%. I want to get it working for me. I want to invest it.
Right.
There's so many options out there for what you could do with that money. Mm-hmm. There's, you got stocks, you got bonds, you got annuities. You've got mutual funds. Where do you even start, and how do you go about, or should you even go about picking between those things? Right. Or is there something else we should be doing?
So, and that's exactly where I was at, and so what, Jerry basically broke each one of those down, and he, and what he explained to me was this. He said there's two problems with just, investing in stocks. He said, if you invest in a given stock, he said, you have no diversification of risk. So if that company goes down, your investment is getting wiped out or significantly reduced based upon the ebbs and flows of that company. So he said stocks in and of themselves can be very dangerous for an individual investor. The other thing he explained to me, which I thought was interesting, he said you have to realize that as an individual investor, you're also playing against all kinds of investment funds and people on Wall Street and things like that, and they make money differently than you make money as an individual. He said, so for example, he said they're very sophisticated, so they can structure investments so they make money if the investment goes up, or they can structure it so they can make money if it goes down. He said, so from Wall Street's perspective, volatility is a good thing.
Yeah, that's where they make their money.
Right. He said from an individual investor standpoint, volatility can be a very bad thing, particularly if you're investing more for the shorter term, because if you catch the cycle wrong, you could have a substantial loss. So he helped me understand the value of diversification or minimizing risks.
Yeah. Well, and also understanding where you're outgunned.
Right. Exactly.
With a lot of, and it's even gotten more so over the years with the Wall Street and these hedge funds, and now they got like the quant funds, and they got machine learning, that's crunching numbers and making trades in tenths of a second.
Yeah.
And that's what you're up against.
Exactly. So, he said you can't win that game.
Right.
Yeah. So don't play it.
Yeah.
So,
which I think is a good point.
Exactly.
You can't win, don't play it.
And the other thing he taught me is he said just as in trying to minimize your personal debt so that you're minimizing the interest you're paying. He said the same concept applies when you're investing. He said there's for almost any investment that you have, there's going to be some type of a fee attached to it that's going to the investment companies. He said, and those fees over time, they cut into the amount of money that you can make on your, on whatever your investment is.
Yeah.
So he said the most important thing the two most important things to understand from an investment standpoint is about diversification of risk and about minimizing your fees. So he said. So you mentioned annuities. You
Yeah.
know, he said. He said annuities. Basically what it's done is supposed to do is it's supposed to you put this amount of money into an investment, and then at some time in the future there's they say that you're gonna get this revenue stream off of it. He said the problem with annuities is the fees tend to be very high, and B the investments that they're going into tend to be sort of mediocre. So he wasn't really a big fan of annuities in that sense because the fee structure and it wasn't really necessarily a great investment.
Yeah.
So
just for I think one point to kind of highlight, which I've heard before, but you mentioned fees and being cognizant of the fees that you're paying on these things. I think it's something that I know the more that I've looked into it, I've recognized because I think the general consensus, or I guess not the consensus, but the instinct or the reaction is typically to look at the fees and say like, all right, this is 3% versus 1%. What's the difference?
Right. And
there's a big difference.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think a lot of people don't really recognize that. Like how does that play out over time? If you're investing in something that's a 3% fee versus a 1% fee, it feels insignificant.
Right. Yeah, but if you stop and think about if that's giving you, if it's the difference between making a 10% annual return or a 7% annual return, there's something in investing. It's called the rule of 7. I remember Jerry talking about it, and it basically what you do is you take whatever the return is. On whatever you're investing in, and you divide it into the number 72. And what it will do is it tells you how long it takes for you to double your money. So if you're making a 10% return, right? Divide that into 72, you're going to double your money every 7.2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. If you if you're making it so if there's a 3% fee on that, then you're only making a 7% return.
Right.
So now you're going to double your money a little bit over every 10 years.
Wow.
So 3% doesn't seem like much, but it takes 3 more years
to get to the same place
to double your money.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a big. So over time, you extrapolate that out to 20, 30 years or whatever.
Right.
You're going to end up with like half the money.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But most people are looking at this and going, what's 3%, 1%? What's the difference?
Or they don't even ask the question.
Right. Yeah. Or that's probably even more common is
right.
What are your fees? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever the normal is.
Exactly. And it's buried in, it's
Yeah.
buried in the literature and those kinds of things. So it's hard to find if you're not specifically looking for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of, I think, of it too is, this is in the same way that all these credit card companies are making money on your interest, the financial institutions are making money on these fees.
Right.
And so, in talking about how it feels overwhelming and very complicated, it's really in their best interest to make it feel that way so that you don't bother to look into it and really understand, oh, wow, I'm paying double what I should be paying here. I don't understand it, so I'm just, not even going to look into it.
Right. Yep, exactly. So here was what Jerry said. He was a huge fan of mutual funds and specifically index funds. So an index fund is basically where there's a couple of different kinds of mutual funds. There's the actively managed funds where there's an individual who's kind of like the investment manager of this mutual fund and probably a team of people who are out there researching different companies and trying to decide, which ones they should invest the fund's money in. So that's an actively managed fund. And the other type of fund is what's called an index fund, where the investments are not actively managed. It's a set portfolio of companies. So, for example, if it was an S&P 500 index fund, it's just a fund that owns those 500 companies. And so there's no one picking and choosing those things. That's just what they invest in. And because it's not actively managed, the fees are significantly lower.
Because there's not anybody doing research or anything
Right,
like that.
exactly. You don't need to have a big staff of people that are researching and those types of things.
Yeah.
Now, so I asked Jerry. I said, but you've got a group of smart, educated people that are out there researching and looking at all these things. Wouldn't they do better than just having a set index fund of these whatever stocks? And he said, if you go and look at it historically, he goes, the answer is unequivocally no. And he said, in fact, it was interesting. A couple of years back, Warren Buffett, who's perhaps the most famous investor of all time, he made a comment where he said that he said it's very, very hard to beat the index.
Wow.
And so here's the best investor of all time who's saying that for the average person, index funds are the way to go.
Yeah.
And so it gives you broad diversification of risk. It gives you very low fees. And, so that was what Jerry recommended. There's now more recently, I think it was like about the mid-90s, there was also something that came out, exchange traded funds, or ETFs, which is in essence another form of an index type fund. They trade a little bit differently. There's slightly different tax ramifications, but for the most part, they're very, very similar.
Okay.
But he was Jerry was a huge fan of index funds, and there's funds. There's technology index funds, and there's the Russell 2000 fund, and there's the Dow funds, and Jerry was a big fan of the S&P 500 fund.
Okay.
And because it's 500 of the the most successful companies. Over time those have changed, but it's got really good diversification. In terms of companies that are consumer products and technology, and
so you're protecting against different industries
right.
going down.
Yeah, so as one's going up, the other's going down, and so it creates more of a balance. And if you look historically, I think the S&P 500 was, I want to say it was established in the middle part of the 1920s. So, I mean, it's been, active for almost 100 years at this point in time. Yeah. And the average return over time has been about 10%.
Wow. So,
so if you look at that with a low fee structure, so I personally use Vanguard. Okay. And is the mutual fund company for their index fund. And I think I think their expense ratio is 0.17%.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, it's virtually nothing.
Yeah.
And so if you look at an average 10% return, over the course of time, about every 7 years, you're doubling the money that you've put in there.
Yeah. Wow. So is when you're having this conversation with Jerry, was he having you, so this 10%, is all of it going into, like 100% is going into an index fund?
Right. Of
this 10%, you're paying yourself first, put it into an index fund.
Yeah. So the, many funds have a minimum. It's funny, I actually just looked at this because I was getting my son started in investing. And so a lot of times the minimums will be like $2,000 or $3,000 somewhere, in that phase. So so what Jerry did is he had me, put it in a 10%, which was, basically just a savings account until it accumulated enough for me to make that minimum purchase.
Okay.
That's one of the advantages of the exchange traded funds is they don't have the same minimums.
Gotcha.
So if you're starting out in investing, it's a little easier to step into the ETFs than an index fund because you're not going to have a minimum.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's kind of the main difference between them. All right. So you mentioned buying homes only when you're ready. Mm-hmm. So this is after the 10%, you're taking the 10%, you're putting into some sort of index fund, and you're you're doing it because over time, and I think that's, just an important point too, is the long-term versus short-term, ramifications or long-term versus short-term view.
Mm-hmm.
So, can we talk just for a second about volatility?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the notion for a lot of people, and my dad's a financial planner, so he gets these calls all the time
Sure.
of the market has a down day and everybody freaks out.
Yeah.
So why should we not be, or should we be concerned, like, if the market has a down day or even there's a bad year,
Right.
There's this impulse to pull your money out,
Right.
and stuff it under your mattress or whatever it is, or get into something else. How should we be thinking about it, from when these types of things happen?
Right. So, in terms of investing, it's very difficult to win in the stock market if you're investing for the short term, because you are going to have that volatility.
Yeah.
And, so you go back and you look, and over the course of the last 90 years, the average has been 10%. Now, so maybe one year it's 5%, maybe another year it might be a negative 3%, but over the course of an extended period of time, it's been about 10%, or a little bit more than. So that's where you have to mentally condition yourself to realize you're going to have the ebbs and flows. You're actually better off not paying that much of attention to it.
Yeah.
There's a saying on Wall Street that scared money never wins. And so trying to time the market, virtually impossible to do. And the other thing too is there's something called dollar cost averaging. So if you're putting, if every month you're putting that 10% into that index fund, what happens is sometimes you're putting money in a downtime, sometimes you're putting money in an uptime, and so that the dollar cost averaging comes out to somewhere there in the middle.
Okay.
So you're gonna you kind of even your investment amounts, and in that sense of things. But the media likes to make a big deal out of the fluctuations in the market, and certainly, in the recent few years, we've seen some big fluctuations in the market. But the reality is, I mean, if you look at like where we were in 2008, when the stock market was crashing, and everybody's investments were upside down, and you're way down, and here we are, 10, 11 years later, and if you look at where the market is relative to then, anything that anybody would have lost in that sense, they've more than made back over the last handful of years. So again, that's where you have to have that long-term mindset, and just remind yourself that over time you're going to have about a 10% return. Yeah.
When you don't want, I think a good point is, you talked about the timing never wins, and it's a very very difficult, near impossible, particularly for an individual investor, to time the market. Mm-hmm. So I think for that, like over time, you have to think about the opportunity cost of not being in the market.
Right.
So if it does go down and you freak out and you pull your money out, and then it starts to go back up, by the time you get your money back in, you've missed out on that interest and
not
growth.
only that, but I mean, where else are you going to put your money? You're going to put it into a CD where you get 2% or 1.5% or something like that. I mean, if you look at that as compared to, again, over time, about 10%.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference. Do the math. If you're getting 2% on money in a CD, that's 36 years to double your money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just financially the return is so much different.
Yeah.
One versus the other.
Yeah. Well, I think the good news with the index funds is it seems to be largely, once you're saying, all right, I'm going to pull 10% out and I'm going to put it into an index fund, so largely set it and forget it, mm-hmm. Which I think is probably a relief for a lot of people to hear.
Right.
that not only can that be a possibility, but it's actually the smarter move
Right.
over the long term.
Yeah, and it's you won't be trying to win picking individual stocks. You're not going to win, because there's other people that are far better equipped to be able to do that than you are.
Right.
But with the index, you've got broad diversification, and you minimize your risk, and you're getting the best technology companies, you're getting the best consumer products companies, you're getting the best defense companies, you're getting the best, so you really are getting you're getting the benefit of investing in the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsofts and the Amazons and all of the kind of sexy stocks.
Right.
But at the same time, you're not getting the risk that comes with only investing in those.
Yeah, sure. You're getting the stocks that are doing great, but nobody's ever heard of.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So after this 10% goes into an index fund, you said the next thing that he talked about was big purchases, and particularly the big one being homes.
Yeah.
And only buying homes when you're ready.
Yeah.
How do you know when you're ready?
So, for most people, the single biggest purchase they're ever going to make is their house.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of the American dream to be a homeowner, So there's the people feel to a certain degree compelled to do that at a certain stage of their lives. What Jerry said is he goes, you never want to buy a house until you can put a minimum of 20% down on it. He said the reason why is if you put less than 20% down, you go into what's called principal mortgage insurance, which is a very expensive insurance that the mortgage company requires you to have to keep, basically to protect them in case you default on the mortgage. So, so it becomes a significant financial expense for you that, again, is taking money away that you could be using to pay off your mortgage sooner.
Yeah.
So there was the 20%, don't buy a house that you can't put at least 20% down on. He said the other thing you want to do is, he goes, you never want to buy a house where your mortgage and your property taxes, school taxes, or whatever taxes you pay, in association with owning that home, is taking more than 25% of what you make every single month. He said, if you end up purchasing something where it's taking more than 25% of what you're making, you're basically house poor, at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so those were kind of the parameters that he set up for buying a house and really knowing how much you could afford in a house, and that's the stuff that the real estate companies and the banks aren't necessarily, going to tell you. In fact, if you look at what happened in the financial crisis with the mortgages, it was, those numbers were way out of whack, for people, because the banks were, again, they were flipping the mortgages, they were making money on them.
Yeah, right. So, so 20% down. So if you're in a situation where, all right, I want to start to work towards buying a house, but you don't have, for where you want to go, what you're looking at, you don't have that 20%, so you want to start working towards it. Should that be set aside differently or on top of the 10% you're putting into an index fund? Is that a separate, after that 10%, are you putting that into a separate savings account? I'm a
huge fan of doing that. And I've done that largely because of what Jerry said, with a lot of things in our finances. So, for example, I take money from every paycheck, and I put it into a separate account for kind of those unexpected expenses. Something breaks in the house, you need to get a roof fixed or the car repaired or something like that you can't really budget for those things because you just don't know when they're going to happen.
Right.
So I've got a savings account where there's just a chunk of money there for the unexpected kind of expenses. That way, if something happens, I'm not stressing out about it. And that just automatically comes out every time there's a paycheck that comes in.
Is that a certain, you set that as a specific dollar amount, or is it a percentage of the paycheck?
Again, for myself, what I do is I pull $500 out of every paycheck.
Okay.
And that goes into that account.
Okay.
And then I use that when there's an unexpected expense, or when there's a big bill that they don't, for example, at least my car insurance, our car insurance, I think that comes through twice a year, every 6 months, and so it's a chunk of money, and I pull that out of that account. So when it comes in, so that way it doesn't send the budget out of whack when when you have those expenses that are the irregular expenses that are coming in.
Gotcha. Okay.
So and I came to the number of $500 just because that whenever those things happened, that was enough money in that account to cover it. So that was just kind of trial and error. It wasn't something that Jerry said, take this amount of money,
this specific amount.
Yeah. And so I'm a huge fan of setting up those automatic withdrawals.
Yeah.
I do the same thing for on our mortgage. What the bank used to do is the bank would pull out the taxes, but the problem is then again they're controlling your money. You're not controlling your money.
Right.
So over time, what I did is I just set it up so every paycheck a certain amount of money comes out, so that when for us we have to pay taxes in February and September. And so come February and come September, there's the money sitting in the account. And I've been making money on it, through the whole year instead of the bank making money on it.
Yeah.
And it's just those automatic withdrawals. So it's a great strategy. It's been hugely helpful and relieved a ton of financial stress.
Yeah. So you can kind of automate your finances to a large degree.
Exactly.
So so putting it into how should we be thinking about putting it into a savings account versus just putting that extra money into more of the index fund?
Right.
Why do one versus the other?
It really comes down to when you anticipate needing the money.
Okay.
So again, when you're investing in the stock market, whether you're doing it in stocks or index funds, or your money is subject to the ebbs and flows of the market.
Sure.
So short-term money, it's not a good idea to put it into something where you've got more variability in your returns.
Right.
You're better off having that in something that's more stable.
Okay.
Long-term money, you're infinitely better off having it in an index fund. So what it really comes down to is it short-term money or long-term money?
And by short-term, you talking within a year, or that's probably
exactly.
Good. Okay, so within a year, it should be in more of a savings account. It's more liquid, less volatility. If it's more than a year out, you're probably better off putting it into an index fund.
Right. Or and again, it's long-term investments, so retirement, those types of things. Those are there's other types of funds where there's less volatility. Mm-hmm. So that's what you're really looking at. The shorter term the money, you want less volatility in there, or lower risk in the money. Okay. So you can invest in treasury bonds and treasury bills and things like that are very stable. There's not a lot of variability in it. You're not going to get a 10% return. Yep. But you're also not subject to the fluctuations either. So if it's short-term money, but let's say it's something that you're anticipating, needing within the next year or 2 years, I would look for something that has less risks than necessarily an index fund, because if you put that money in an index fund and the stock market crashes next year, right, that it's gonna have a negative ramification.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so all right, so buy homes or big purchases only when you're ready. Yep. Homes in particular, you're not buying, and when you're ready because you're able to put 20% down, right, and it's not more than, between the mortgage and the taxes, it's not more than 25% of what's coming in.
Yeah, and then if you go back to what we talked about in our last, what Jerry had me do there is, again, split the payment in half and pay half my mortgage on the 15th and half my mortgage on the 30th. Yeah. And that right there, it on a 30-year mortgage will take about 10 years off of your mortgage. Wow. That's 10 years you're not paying interest.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how the little
nuance makes a big difference.
Makes a huge difference. Okay, so there was one last part in terms of building your net worth, which was you kind of mentioned protecting it.
Right.
Protecting what you've built. What do you mean by that?
Okay. So you've worked so hard to get control over your money. You've worked on building your net worth. But the reality is sometimes unfortunate situations and circumstances happen, and so what Jerry said is he said, you can't account for that. He goes, you just don't know what, you hope that you're always going to be healthy. You hope that you're always, he said, but God forbid something happens. And you want to make sure that, that your family is safe if something happens. So that's where he started to talk to me about insurance, specifically life insurance. He said, traditionally, people don't like to think about life insurance because they don't want to think about themselves dying.
Right.
But he sat down and he really talked to me about the importance of it. He said, you want to make sure Michelle, and, if at that point we didn't have kids, but, he goes, if you have kids later on, that she's not going to have to worry.
Yeah.
So it really helped me to understand about life insurance and the different types that are out there, and how do you know how much to buy, and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. All right. So let's go there. How do you know how much to buy? How much life insurance do you need?
Yeah. So Jerry's rule was, he goes, you take your income and multiply it by 10.
Okay.
And that's how much you should have. So
Okay.
The other thing is, he said, you got to think about kind of the stage of life you're in. He said, so when you're when you're younger, he said he goes, your risk of having something happen is lower. He said, because it's lower, life insurance tends to be less expensive. He said, as you get older, he said, the risk of something happening to you goes up, and therefore life insurance gets more expensive. He said, but what you also got to realize is that as you get older, typically your expenses go down. He goes, you built a larger net worth. Your kids are maybe out of college and those kinds of things. So he said, life insurance isn't as important when you're 60 years old as it is when you're 30 or 40 years old.
Okay.
So his rule was 10%. He said, he goes, if you're looking at kids' college expenses and things like that, he said you may want to add a couple of percent onto that. So to make sure that if God forbid something was to happen, to me, that Michelle and the kids and things, that they can maintain the the lifestyle that we built for ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. So about 10 times the income, or a little bit more if you're depending on the stage of life you're in. If you got kids that trying to send to college and whatnot. How do you know? There's a lot of different types of life insurance. So how do you know which one you should be buying?
Okay.
What are the different types,
Yeah.
and then how do you pick?
So and again, that was something that Jerry he talked to me about. He said, so there's really three primary types of life insurance, as he explained it to me. He goes, you've got term insurance, you've got whole life insurance, and you've got universal life insurance. The difference is term life is just pure insurance, right? So if you've got $1 million policy and something happens to you, then it pays out $1 million to your spouse. He said whole life insurance is like term insurance, but with an investment built on. So you're building cash value. So in essence, if you're paying $100 a month for life insurance, your $80 of that would go towards the insurance piece of it, and $20 of it would go towards some type of an investment.
Okay.
The universal life is very similar in that regard. There's an insurance component and an investment component. Jerry wasn't a big fan of whole life and universal life, for a couple of reasons. He said what insurance companies try to do is they try to sell you those because in essence it's kind of it's like a forced savings or a forced investment type of of a program. So for someone who's got no control over their finances, right? They hadn't done any of the other things that we're talking about. It's like a forced savings plan for them. So in that sense, it's not a bad idea. The problem that Jerry had with it is he explained it. He goes, the investment component of it, he goes, it tends not to be a good investment, right? And he goes, it tends to have a lot of high fees tied to it.
Okay.
So he said it sort of defeats what you're trying to accomplish from an investment perspective. He goes, you're better off, he goes, buy the low-cost term insurance, which is cheaper when you're young, and take the extra money that you would have paid and put it into your index fund. He said,
Gotcha.
From an investment standpoint, it's a far better investment with far lower fees.
Okay. All right. So you're better off with the term,
Right.
And any money that you would have put into whole life or a universal policy, just take that, put it into the index fund because you're going to do better there anyways.
You do far better from an investment perspective. And your insurance will be significantly less than term policies are, especially when you're young. I mean, if you're in your 30s, you can get $1 million term policy. It's different for men and women, and it's different if you smoke or not. There's some variables and things that are tied to it. But it can be as low as a couple $100 a year. So you look at if God forbid something was to happen for $200 a year, you're looking at your spouse saying, okay, well, they're going to have $1 million to make sure that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that gives us a good sense. So in terms of building your net worth, you're paying yourself first. First, even before that, you're maxing out your 401k.
Right.
Second, you're paying yourself first. You're taking 10% off the top. You're going to put that into an index fund because it's tough to beat and really low fees.
Yep.
You're buying homes only when you're ready, when you can put 20% down, and the mortgage and the taxes are less than 25% of what you got coming in the door.
Yep.
And we're looking at term life insurance as opposed to whole or universal. And any money you would save on term, you're going to put back into, might as well just put back into the index funds.
And roughly, 10% of whatever your annual salary is, you should have that, roughly about that much in insurance.
Okay. So in order to wrap up, kind of where I wanted to wrap was before we kind of close this conversation on money, I thought it would be good to talk about the mindset that people have around money, the mindset particularly they have around wealth, and kind of the importance of that. Could you speak to, when we're thinking about building our net worth, we're thinking about wealth. I think, there's kind of two components to this where there's the first part which is sometimes there's the perspective that money is evil, and or that you don't deserve it, and then there's also a part of having an abundance mindset when it comes to finances versus a scarcity mindset. So just in general, with kind of all those pieces in play, how should we be thinking about this? How can we kind of cultivate the right mindset so that now that we kind of know the fundamentals of this, we can stick to it and want to stick to it?
Yeah. The things to understand about money is that, with regard to money, time is your best friend, So for a lot of people, what they do is they when they're in their 20s, they're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm trying to build a life. I'm trying to, I'm starting to acquire. I got a nice car. I'm, thinking about where I want to live. I'm, all of those kinds of things. So people tend to be very distracted in their 20s. So a lot of people really don't start thinking about, thinking about retirement. Because when you're 20 years old, you're thinking, I'm going to retire when I'm 65, and that's 40 years from now. And, so they're very far removed. Remember, go back to that rule of sevens, right? So if you're getting 10% on your money and so your money's roughly doubling every 7 years. So if you're 20 years old and you don't start investing till you're 34, that's 2 doublings.
Yeah.
So, so you start thinking about that, and you're going, oh my God, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars difference.
Yeah.
And, so that was one of the things I actually, I started a couple of years ago with my son. He had, he's 21 and so he's 19 when we started this. And he had a little bit of extra money from graduation and and that kind of stuff. And I sat down with him. I said, and I said to him, Ben, I said, let's take this, let's put it into a mutual fund, And I was just trying to get him in the habit of putting money away on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because it's that compounding effect. That's another thing Warren Buffett said. He said the most powerful force in the universe, was it Buffett said it, or was it Einstein? It might have been Einstein who actually said that. Was the most powerful force in the universe is the compounding effect of money.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Einstein or if it was Buffett, but
Yeah.
both pretty wise
Both,
guys.
yeah.
So
Either way, you're pretty good.
You can take advice from either
Yeah.
one. You'd probably be okay.
Yeah.
Is there a philosophy that money is the root of all evil? Well, I don't know that it's money that's the root of all evil. I think people are the root of all evil, and the decisions that they choose to make, So, if you look at, like what Bill Gates has done, here's, one of, if not the wealthiest people in the world, but what he's done with the Gates Foundation. And, so however you decide what you decide to do with your money is entirely up to you. If you build a net worth, then now you have more of a net worth to be able to give to charities and give to causes that mean something to you. You build a measure of financial peace of mind for yourself and your loved ones. And so it's money in and of itself isn't the root of all evil. It's what people choose to do with it that makes it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think somebody had I can't remember where I heard this, but you've heard the saying, and I think there's so much truth to it, that people think that money changes people. Money doesn't change people. Money just amplifies who they are.
Yeah. Yep.
And so for people listening to this, you're a good person.
Yeah. There you go.
But I think there's so much truth to that. For if you are a good person, money is just going to amplify the amount of good that you can do.
Yeah. Well, I remember the movie star from I think she was in the 20s and 30s. Mae West was one of the big movie stars back in the day, and there was a great quote that she had where she said, "I've been rich and I've been poor, and it's better to be rich."
Yep. Yeah.
So it just the reality is money gives you options.
Yeah.
Money allows you access to more experiences in life. It allows you to do more good if you choose to do good. So you're right. It amplifies who you are.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other piece of it too that I think, at least in my view, is a misconception with a lot of people is that money is a zero-sum game, and that I don't look at it that way. That money is, because people kind of think like, well, if I'm making money, then somebody else is losing money.
Right.
But I think I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Well, that's based on the assumption that money is a finite resource.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's not. Money increases the value of things over the course of time. And the government hasn't stopped printing money, so it's not a finite. It's candidly, it's not in their interest to make it a finite resource,
right?
So if one person is financially succeeding, that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else has to financially lose for that to happen.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true. Just by the fact that the index funds have performed at 10% returns every year. If it was a finite resource, they'd go up and they go down.
Right.
But they've pretty consistently gone up
over the course of time. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Dave. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap up our money chat?
What I've found in the journey is that two of the most important aspects of life, and I won't say they're the only two, but certainly two of the most important aspects, are the time and the energy that we invest in the relationships with the people around us, and the peace of mind that we can gain from gaining a measure of control over our finances. And so if we're going to invest in anything, those are two things that are pretty good to invest in.
I would have to agree with that.
There you go.
All right. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, one more thing before you take off. This is Motivational Intelligence Insider. It's just a very short, exclusive email every Monday that comes from Dave, John, and the guests on this show. This is the only place they share their very, very best stuff, and it's delivered right to your inbox every single Monday. This could include exclusive tips for upping your game, articles they're reading, videos they're watching, stories from the road, and on and on. It's the best way to kick off your week, and this content comes directly from Dave, John, and the guests, and is only available to subscribers of Motivational Intelligence Insider. So if you want these guys and gals to email you their best stuff, go to 2logical.com/insider. That's the number 2logical.com/insider, and drop in your email. And if you do, I hope you enjoy.
The Motivational Intelligence Podcast is produced by the team at 2Logical. 2Logical is an international corporate training firm and the world's leading expert in motivational intelligence, which is the ability to understand, manage, and change the motives people have. 2Logical offers over 30 different keynotes, workshops, and full training courses to small, medium, and large Fortune 500 companies in 53 countries, a lot of which you're probably familiar with: Pfizer, Bank of America, GE, Constellation Brands, P&G, and more. All solutions are completely customized, and the feedback from these sessions will blow your mind. If you have any training or speaking needs or just want to say hey, head over to 2logical.com.